Did you know we have completely ad-free early access to all of our episodes? Well, we do. Not only that, but we have dozens of bonus episodes waiting for you. Head on over to patreon.com/ghosttownpod, and you can check it out for 7 days absolutely free. That's patreon.com/ghosttownpod. Lost at Sea. I'm Jason Horton.
I'm Rebecca Lieb.
And this is Ghost Town.
In 1968, Dougal Robertson, his wife Linda Robertson, and their 4 children, 18-year-old Anne, 16-year-old Douglas, and their 9-year-old twins, Neil and Sandy, were listening to the radio. The Robertsons weren't listening to news or music, but the life of British master yachtsman Robert Knox Johnston's attempt to become the first person to sail solo around the world nonstop. And the family was entranced. The segment prompted 9-year-old Neil to say, quote, "Daddy's a sailor. Why don't we sail around the world too?" Nobody could argue why not, but one idea from a 9-year-old boy would snowball into something much bigger than a family trip, a wild goal that would turn dangerous and eventually threaten the lives of the entire family. Today on Ghost Town, the Robertson family shipwreck. Even before deciding to sail around the world with his young family, Dougal Robertson had an eventful and tragic life tied to the sea. Born in Edinburgh, Scotland in 1924, Dougal had always liked sailing, ships, and the ocean, attending Leith Nautical College and then joining the British Merchant Navy. He married, had a son, and began his young life. But at just 18 years old, his trajectory was horrifically and abruptly cut short. Heartbreakingly, an attack occurred on a Sri Lankan ship Robertson's family was traveling on, and Robertson's wife and son were killed. After this incident, Robertson quit the Navy and began working as a dairy farmer in the UK. He eventually remarried and began a new family with eldest daughter Anne, eldest son Douglas, and twin sons. But Dougal Robertson always loved the ocean and felt somewhat stifled by his land-based life. The most notable daily occurrence was the milk wagon turning up to take the milk their cows had produced to Manchester. But not only was it boring, per se, but because of this specific rural lifestyle, Dougal Robertson felt like his kids weren't getting a good education in the ways of the world. For example, one day Dougal and his son Neil followed the wagon to the neighboring farm where it stopped to pick up more milk. Neil asked his father if this was Manchester. Dougal went, "How stupid can my children be?" According to Douglas Robertson, Dougal Robertson's eldest son, quote, "That started his belief that his kids were disadvantaged by their rural upbringing." So, in 1968, decades after his young naval life had ended, Dougal Robertson liked his 9-year-old son's idea of sailing around the world again, on his and his family's own terms. What could go wrong? But of course, the Robertsons weren't thinking like that. They were ready for a big family adventure. So they set a plan in motion. In the summer of 1970, the family sold their entire dairy farm and used their life savings to buy a boat in Malta named Lucette, a 43-foot wooden schooner built in 1922. The family set sail on January 27, 1971. Said Douglas Robertson in an incredible in-depth interview with People magazine, quote, "We didn't even sail around the bay for a bit of practice with the yacht before we set sail from around the world." Dougal said training is best done on the job. That turned out to be short-sightedness. On-the-job training consisted of bad weather, run-ins with other ships, and parts of the Lucette breaking, but that was all perhaps to be expected. Mostly, the family was having a blast, fishing, hanging out with one another, and meeting other sailors. The Robertsons went from UK to Lisbon, then to the Canary Islands. They inherited a life raft from an Icelandic family they had befriended early on in the trip. Dougal Robertson, a proud man, at first didn't want to accept the raft. It was only when they were told that the raft was for his family, not for him, that he reluctantly agreed to take it. The Robertsons then traversed the Caribbean islands, up through the Bahamas, and to Miami, where they stayed for about 6 months. They did some odd jobs there and saved money for the next leg of their trip. The family left the United States in January 1972 and sailed onward, but they were down one family member, the oldest sister, Anne. She had fallen in love in Miami and decided to hang back. Quote, "It changed the boat because we were no longer a full family," Douglas Robertson said. "We'd left one of our people behind." But the rest of the Robertsons sailed on to Jamaica, through the Panama Canal and southwest to the Galapagos Islands, where they stayed for 3 weeks before heading to the Marquesas Islands approximately 2,000 miles away. On the way, they picked up a student hitchhiker in Panama named Robin Williams, who agreed to pay a token rate and teach the children English and math, while accompanying them on the next stage of their voyage. At 10 a.m. on June 15, 1972, 2 days and 200 miles away from the Galapagos, the family was weathering a choppy morning at sea. 18-year-old Douglas Robertson soon heard a bang, then another, and another. Then the Lucette was lifted out of the sea. Quote, "I thought, what the hell was that? We must have gone aground." He looked at his father and discovered that he was ankle-deep in water. Then Douglas looked over his shoulder to the vastness of the ocean. Douglas observed, quote, "There were 3 orcas, a daddy, mommy, and a baby in between. The daddy's head was split open and bleeding badly." Turning back to his father, Douglas realized what had actually happened. The whales had attacked the schooner. His father said, quote, "Abandoned ship, we're sinking." Douglas replied, "Abandoned ship? We're not in the marina. We're in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. Abandoned ship to where?" Dougal then replied to his oldest son, quote, "Over there," and then pointed to the ocean. At that point, the Robertson family had been at sea for 17 months, but the Lucette was sinking fast and the family was panicking. All they had was their dinghy and a raft gifted to them far earlier in the trip. Dougal told Douglas and Robin Williams to throw the dinghy and raft into the sea, which led to another disaster. The dinghy sank into the ocean. Douglas and Robin managed to retrieve it, but it was flooded. For now, they were reliant on the 80-pound raft for their survival. Not only that, at this point, the sinking ship and flimsy raft were surrounded by approximately 20 whales. Douglas Robertson would say in a later interview that he definitely thought this was the end. Quote, "This is it, Douglas. This is how you're going to die. You're going to be eaten by bloody killer whales." "I don't know how I had the courage to do it," he went on. "I think I was just numb. I stayed in the water and helped everybody onto the raft. I kept feeling for my legs to see if I'd still got them because I heard you don't feel the bite. You just see the blood in the water." Douglas was last on the raft, which was tethered to the waterlogged dinghy. He felt safe, briefly. Quote, "At least I had my legs. I hadn't been eaten. I'd survived." The shock of what happened, however, quickly hit the Robertson family. Quote, "My mom said, 'Let's say the Lord's Prayer.' My dad and I were atheists. I thought, bugger it, I'm going to ask God to spare us." Dougal said, "I don't believe in God. I'm not saying the Lord's Prayer." I said, "Dad, couldn't you just say the Lord's Prayer? It doesn't matter if you don't mean it." Dougal said, ever argumentative with his son, "Don't you think if there was a God, he would know that I didn't mean it and it wouldn't count anyway?" Bloody hell. Hundreds of miles from land with one raft, a flooded dinghy, 10 days' supply of tinned water, and 10 days' worth of food if they didn't eat much. The family and their friend were alone. But were they within 10 days of land? Would they possibly survive? Nobody was very optimistic. It was Linda Robertson who expressed what the panicked family was thinking. According to Douglas, she said, quote, "Dougal, be straight with us. Are we going to die or do we stand a chance?" Dougal didn't know the answer. He then asked Douglas a terrifying question. If they could get the dinghy in working order, would he agree to row the 250 miles back to the Galapagos Islands and raise the alarm? Quote, "For the first time in my life, I said, 'No, Dad,'" Douglas would later say. "That's 25 miles a day. Can I row 25 miles a day for 10 days against the current and the wind? No, I can't. It's a fool's errand. In any case, I'd rather die out here with you than die alone." Realizing their ultimate reality out there on the flimsy dinghy, the family reassessed the situation. Quote, "We made pledges to each other." Douglas Robertson said, quote, "One was that we would not eat each other. We would die quietly if that's what it came to, and we would look for a rescue ship. That would be our best chance to get out of this. In the meantime, they headed for the doldrums, where the northeast and southeast trade winds meet, causing heavy thunderstorms. If they could make it to the doldrums, the family rationalized, they could find fresh rainwater. Using the dinghy as a towboat powered by a jury-rigged sail, the group made its way, unsure of this chapter of their journey. After 6 days, the castaways spotted a ship. They had 2 parachute flares and 3 hand flares with them. Douglas was sure it was their time to be rescued, but Douglas and Dougal, like many of their other exchanges, had different viewpoints and argued on what to do next. Douglas said, quote, "Dad, fire the flare at the ship, not up in the air. Fire it straight at the bloody ship." While Dougal said, quote, "I can't do that, Douglas. They might have explosives on deck." Douglas replied, quote, "Bugger that. If it blows up, they'll send out an SOS, and it could pick us up at the same time." Dougal replied, quote, "I can't believe how ruthless you've become." As they argued, the ship receded into the distance, and the Robertson family lost their chance of rescue. Needless to say, it was a devastating moment. Would the family ever see dry land or another human being? What happened next after this break? 6 days in, the Robertson family and their hitchhiker, Robin Williams, only had 4 days' supply of tinned water left and were hoarding the remaining food. One day a turtle hopped on the raft, and Douglas, having read a fiction book where a character ate a turtle, suggested they eat him. But killing a turtle proved harder than they had expected. They tried twice, but eventually the turtle escaped. But hunger and desperation breeds more resourcefulness. Now in their second week stranded, the family was, again, hungrier than ever. Said Douglas Robertson, quote, "We thought about nothing but food, all the meals we'd rushed. Why didn't we take our time to enjoy them? We talked about food all the time. You can't get away from it. You've got bloody fresh fruit salad in your head, beef stew, roast beef, and Yorkshire pudding. Yum." When a third turtle came along, the family was determined that it would not escape. Said Douglas, quote, "I tied him up in rope. We hauled him on board and cut his throat. We bled him out into a cup, and Dougal was the first to drink his blood. We looked at him like, 'Are you going to die?' And he said, 'It's not salty. We can drink this.' It was strong but sweet. We thought we might be able to live on turtles. It's red meat, like steak." After 12 days, the family reached the doldrums and waited for rain. 1 day, 2 days, and still nothing. At this point, the raft was on its last legs. The fish had eaten holes in it, and it was leaking. The Robertsons were covered in boils, and nobody could sleep because they were up to their chest in water. There was one dry place on the raft, and everyone took turns on that part, getting an hour each day to dry off in the sun. After 3 days in the doldrums, mercifully, the rain began. Douglas Robertson said, quote, "It rained like you wouldn't believe. We were so happy. We were singing, collecting rain, filling the containers, the elixir of life. We drank as much as we could. Big thunderstorms in the doldrums. It rained for about 2 bloody days." To conserve the rest of the water and prepare for another round of dehydration, Linda Robertson came up with the idea of giving everyone enemas to stay hydrated. While this isn't medically proven, I checked, Linda had made an enema tube from the rung of a ladder and began administering them to the rest of her family. To keep sane, the Robertsons also got very into catching fish, as you might imagine, including dorado, fly fish, sharks, turtles, and dolphins. Quote, "We did manage to catch turtles and found a way of drinking their blood so we could stay hydrated. We also caught dolphins, sucking their eyeballs and their vertebrae for water. Even a shark's stomach provided us with what resembled a cooked meal from the partially digested contents." While terse, Dougal Robertson would keep a record of their time at sea. Here are some notable data points from the family's later days. Day 18. A tasty breakfast of flying fish, turtle meat, mixed with pieces of turtle fat. Saw frigate birds and storm petrels. Clothing were disintegrating, causing sunburn. Day 19. A blue-footed booby landed on Douglas's shoulder. Day 20. 4th of July was Lynn's birthday. Birthday feast of fresh turtle meat, and dried dorado with water to drink. Saying happy birthday to Lynn. Day 21, the sea anchor and float broke away. Douglas rowed after it in a feat of sheer endurance, taking 35 minutes of rowing to retrieve it. The afternoon, Douglas saw a green flare often used by submarines or maneuvers, but nothing came of it. Day 22, caught a large turtle. Had to drink the blood quickly before it coagulated. saved the deep yellow fat. There was a terrible storm and torrential rain. The days, like this, wore on until it was the 38th day the family was stranded. Everyone was close to giving up, except for Dougal and Linda, whose sole mission was to get their children out of the water and onto dry land. The family suspected that they were close to land, at least they hoped, and Dougal Robertson instructed everyone to start rowing. When they did, something appeared in the distance. It was a fishing boat called the Tokomaru II. The family had 2 flares left that they'd saved from the Lucette, which they immediately used, hoping the ship would see them. At that point, Dougal said, "Well, it's all in God's hands now." To the atheist's delight, God seemed to listen. The fishing boat turned towards them and threw a line to the forlorn dinghy. The Robertson family was saved. On the Tokomaru II, the starved family was offered bread, coffee, and orange juice. The captain said, quote, "I thought you maybe had scurvy because you smelled so bad." The shipwrecked people bathed for the first time in 6 weeks. While weak, everyone had survived. Too fragile to fly, the Robertsons were taken by ship back to their home. Says Douglas Robertson, quote, "We had sight of a common goal, and what got us through that challenging time was we worked as a team and contributed our special skills in achieving that goal. Dougal was the strategist, my mother provided the care, I provided the muscles, Robin kept our morale up, and the twins kept us honest. They reinforced the need for us to survive for their young lives." Oddly enough, this life-threatening situation seemed to make many of the Robertsons want to continue to explore the ocean or revisit their time while shipwrecked. Dougal Robertson would go on to write a book called Sea Survival, a manual, and with the proceeds bought a yacht. He even continued to sail until his death from cancer in 1991. Douglas Robertson joined the Merchant Navy and sailed around the world 3 different times. Linda Robertson, however, went back to dairy farming, content to stay on land. Robin Williams, surprisingly enough, is still alive, healthy, and active on Facebook, and often responds to people wondering how he's doing. In 2024, Robin Williams wrote, quote, "Robin here. Yes, I'm still around, now well retired, but still full of adventure. Been married since 1975 with 4 adult kids living in various parts of the world. We, Doug, Sandy, Neil, and myself, met for the first time in many years last September. A great time to share our memories." Dougal Robertson's manual wasn't just for self-expression or publicity either. According to Stephen Callahan, who in 1981 was stranded for 76 days in the Atlantic Ocean, the book's tips and insights were integral to Callahan's survival during his own shipwreck. Now 70, Douglas Robertson, again the person I quoted throughout this episode, is still outspoken from his trip, but he hasn't sailed that much. In fact, he leads a quieter life as an accountant on dry land. He enjoys inspiring people with his story, though, which he believes is not one of just survival, but of death and perseverance. Quote, "If you just say, 'Look, you were cast adrift for 38 days. Get over it. You survived.' Well, that's true," he said. "But what is also true is that you keep thinking that you're going to die. You die 5 times a day. That changes you and makes you value life. And it's those things that make you into a stronger person."
Did you know we have completely ad-free early access to all of our episodes? Well, we do. Not only that, but we have dozens of bonus episodes waiting for you. Head on over to patreon.com/ghosttownpod, and you can check it out for 7 days absolutely free. That's patreon.com/ghosttownpod.